This is All About Bitcoin, a show dedicated to all things, questions, and markets related to Bitcoin. Little b for the currency, and Bitcoin, big B for the network. A collective journey to understand, apply, and use this innovation. All Bitcoin, all the time. I'm your host, Michael Casey, filling in for Christine Lee this week. So, top stories in the news today. With El Salvador's Bitcoin law about to go into effect next week, the government has agreed to create a $150 million Bitcoin trust to facilitate exchange between Bitcoin and US dollars in the country. That, according to the local newspaper, El Diario de Hoy. The trust will be set up at the Development Bank of El Salvador and allow merchants to instantly convert Bitcoin into US dollars, offsetting their risk. The new law, passed last June, treats Bitcoin as legal tender alongside the US dollar. It requires businesses to accept payment in Bitcoin, although the country's president said businesses would not be penalized if they did not accept it. Groups of Salvadorans, said to consist of retirees, have been staging protests against the law, citing fears over Bitcoin's volatility. It's shaping up to be a busy fall on the regulatory front in the United States. CoinDesk's Nick Day reports 3 key things that he's watching for with the SEC. The first is the possible approval of a Bitcoin futures ETF. Judging from comments from SEC Chair Gary Gensler, it appears a futures-based ETF is more likely to win approval than a spot-based ETF. The second big thing on Nick's radar is who will win jurisdiction over crypto. The SEC wants more authority to regulate the sector, but current and former CFTC officials feel strongly it belongs under that agency's jurisdiction. Last but not least, there's DeFi. The SEC seems to be building precedent for more enforcement actions in this part of the world. Okay, checking in on the Bitcoin price. The CoinDesk Bitcoin Price Index, the XBX, is at 47,373. That's up about 0.4% from where it was yesterday. Edan Yago, contributor at DeFi protocol Sovryn, joins us now to discuss developments in El Salvador.
Hi,
Edan.
Michael.
Good to see you again.
Good to chat again.
It's been a long time.
Nice to chat again. Yeah.
So, listen, you've been interested in Bitcoin since some time, since you and I have been talking about this thing for a number of years now, and I know you're a big supporter of what's happening in El Salvador. But, there are concerns that people will be forced to hold something they don't want. How confident are you that this won't resolve in something that's a challenge for Salvadorans, that they will come to accept this as something valuable and not feel as if it's something thrust upon them?
Well, as a Bitcoiner, I don't place my trust in governments, even governments that accept Bitcoin. And so I can't say with any certainty how the government of El Salvador or any other will treat with this in the future. But isn't a currency that they control. And that's the phenomenal thing about El Salvador choosing to move on to a Bitcoin standard. The incentives aren't there for the country to try and force people to do anything. And so I think that's the really big innovation here, and the courageous step that they've taken is bringing to the country a sound money, which is not going to be corrupted by the incentives of this or future governments.
Okay, so your argument is that, regardless of, say, Article 7, which some people have been critical as saying that it ultimately requires people to accept it if it's given to them, that the incentive misalignment is the thing that is different. That they're not. There's no interest in them. But I'm also interested in the idea of this, the geothermal plant that, for example, the government owns that will be working. It's called the Volcano Money Project, I suppose some people are calling it, where they would mine Bitcoin. It seems to me that there is potentially some conflict there in the sense that the government could be, essentially being the biggest holder of Bitcoin and be interested in it from that perspective, but obviously not controlling Bitcoin, as you put it. How do you, are there ways in which, let me put it this way, the mining of Bitcoin might not be so centralized in the country other than through this one plant?
I mean, it's very possible. So this hasn't happened in El Salvador, but Paraguay have a law that is being sort of shopped around, where the government is seeking to take control over mining. And similar things have happened in Iran and in Venezuela. So mining of Bitcoin is valuable. And sometimes corrupt governments will seek to try and gain a monopoly over that. It's hard, but it's possible. The thing is that even a government which gains a monopoly within its own borders by coercing its own people has no impact on the coercive ability of Bitcoin elsewhere.
Absolutely. Now, with regards, though, to the volatility concerns, right, that people feel, again, that they're not being compelled. There has obviously been some focus on trying to find an easy way for people to convert to the currency that they're much more familiar with, which is the US dollar. How do you know how this $150 million trust is going to work, for example? Are you confident that that will help ease through those exchange challenges?
Yeah, so first of all, with regards to the protests that have occurred today, people are always scared of change. And so I think what we should have expected, which we did expect, and what we're seeing is the opposition latching onto that fear in an attempt to try and curry favor, because it's the easiest thing to latch onto. And it is really remarkable that whenever a country or a leader is able to move beyond that fear and have a vision. And so President Bukele and what he's done and what El Salvador are doing is truly remarkable, because they've managed to overcome that sort of innate human knee-jerk fear and think about how they can construct a better future and do things differently. Because if you keep doing things the same way, you're not going to end up in a different place. Now, with regards to the $150 million fund, I think the $150 million fund is only a start. There's going to be a need for vastly more. There are billions of dollars in commerce and remittance that go to even a small country like El Salvador. And so El Salvador is looking to introduce additional players. There are conversations with Bitcoin companies and Bitcoin protocols like, I've been contributing to Sovryn. We've been engaged. There's an effort there to encourage the entire Bitcoin community to participate and help deal with the frictions that are involved in doing such a new thing. And I think it's up to us as the Bitcoin community to show the same courage and foresight as the country of El Salvador.
So tell me a little bit what Sovryn is doing down there then, given that you are engaged down there. What have you been up to?
Right. So I can't speak to specifics, but Sovryn is a protocol designed to allow for decentralized financial and economic tools, what some people would call DeFi, specifically with Bitcoin. In other words, it's Bitcoin native. And so one of the key things that is of interest is the ability to borrow and lend, so that people in El Salvador will be able to use their Bitcoin assets as collateral in the same way that people on Ethereum are using ETH as collateral. And then an even more thing is Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. So the reason the $150 million fund exists is because Bitcoin, in relation to fiat currencies, is volatile. And so there needs to be a way for regular people to have access to something which is not volatile, and Bitcoin-backed stablecoins fit the bill perfectly for El Salvador, a country which marries Bitcoin and dollars, just like Bitcoin-backed stablecoins do.
Okay. One last question, just looking at the criticisms that have come from, probably not all that surprisingly, the IMF, the World Bank and others, and President Bukele having something of a reputation in those official circles of being authoritarian, let's say. How do you feel about all that? I mean, is this what is the impact of El Salvador's prospects with this initiative look like with if the international community is not supportive?
I think we should all be in awe. Simply, I'm dumbstruck by the fact that El Salvador has continued the course despite a visit from the IMF, despite a visit from the World Bank, and seems determined to continue along its way. And that has given me a great deal of confidence, because I think what they are proving is true leadership, right? The ability for a country like El Salvador to ever find something where they have enough leverage that they can become a world leader is vanishingly rare. And the fact that they've managed to grasp this opportunity, I think, is a risk from the perspective of their reputation. But their reputation is the thing which stands least to suffer. And the upside for them is an asymmetrical bet, just like the rest of Bitcoin.
Interesting way to put it. All right. Well, thank you very much, Edan. That was Edan Yago of Sovryn. Coming up, Bitcoin markets analysis with Arca.
The chart of the day is brought to you by Crypto.com, the world's fastest growing crypto app.
Time now for chart of the day. As Markets reporter Dominic Dantes reports, Bitcoin continues to be range-bound. The cryptocurrency is stuck, he says, in a tight range between $46,000 at the support level and $50,000 resistance, and it's roughly flat over the past week. The relative strength index is almost oversold, according to this 4-hour chart. Dominic believes the consolidation phase is likely to persist this week as the August 6th price breakout above 42,000 appears to be a little on the exhausted side. Okay, joining us now to discuss the Bitcoin market is Jeff Dorman, Chief Investment Officer at Arca. Hey there, Jeff. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Hope you're doing well as well. So, look, I mean, we got a bit excited. I think it was last week. Bitcoin got over 50,000. I was struck memories of the days when the Dow got through 10,000 all those years ago, and then we had to throw out the Dow Jones caps that I was working at the time and come back again and revisit it. The fact that it hasn't managed to consolidate over that level, is that a good sign, a bad sign? What's your take on the failure to keep heading higher?
I think it's a bad sign only in the sense that there's a fair amount of technical analysis investors out there who are just expecting it to get above 50,000 and then break out and be off to the races for the rest of the fourth quarter, just like we were last year. But outside of that near-term movement, it really doesn't matter. I think there were a lot of positive factors for Bitcoin specifically in the last few days here that really failed to create price action. But that doesn't mean we won't find new factors in the next few weeks. Things we were looking at was we had a very large options expiry on Thursday last week. We expected that to be led or to follow rather by a lot of call buyers rather than the typical call sellers that we see that usually suppresses vol. And we saw that. We saw a lot of big call option volume going through on Thursday into expiry and as well as on Friday heading into the weekend, and it really didn't do much in terms of Bitcoin pricing. You also had Jackson Hole, right? The Fed was fairly consistent with their views that tapering is a fairly far away from now. We're not going to have interest rate rises anytime soon. We saw a real risk-on rally everywhere else in the market. The VIX collapsed. Equities were higher. We saw Treasury yields lower. The dollar was lower. That should have been very bullish for Bitcoin and other risk assets, and it really was for everything other than Bitcoin. And now you also have the month-end flows. This is becoming more of an institutional market, which means you will see positions start to move probably over the next 5 hours here into the end of the month, and also into the first few days of the new month as funds start to get new inflows that they put to work. So there was a lot of bullish factors that should have led to a more Bitcoin interest, and it just isn't happening right now.
You just described that there was an institutional market, and clearly at the beginning of the year, that was the big driver, the arrival of the institutions. So by that, we really mean the sort of, I suppose, non-crypto native institutions. Heard anecdotes that they're still there and still interested. And what's your take? Are they there, or are they waiting for the next opportunity? Is this just a lull? Are institutions truly coming in or not?
I think the institutions are absolutely coming in. They're just not coming into Bitcoin. Bitcoin, we've said this on your show in the past, Bitcoin to us is just a binary option. It's either worth zero or it's worth probably $1 million per token. And everything else in between is largely just sort of noise and trading functions on a path to getting to one of those two extremes. I think going to zero is incredibly unlikely. I think heading towards $500,000 to $1 million a token is much more likely. But that might take 20 years to get there. And if you're going to compare Bitcoin as digital gold and compare it to gold, well, not that many institutional investors care that much about gold either. So you can't expect them to be sitting here on pins and needles looking at Bitcoin every minute of every day. They'll come in when there's a catalyst, and they'll sit on it and hold it for a while. but they're just not actively participating as much as they are in parts of DeFi and NFTs and gaming and the other sectors and other areas of the digital asset economy that have more frequent relevant news than Bitcoin does, right? Bitcoin's a long game. Everything else is happening weeks at a time.
Okay. In that case, perhaps the El Salvador news that we were just discussing, these sorts of issues, would you see that as being relevant to the price of Bitcoin or not? Is it sort of like everything comes down to this big, 20-year play rather than the developments on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you exactly how relevant it was. I manage $500 million across multiple funds, including exposure to Bitcoin, and I didn't even know that news until 5 minutes ago when I saw it on your show. So, no, I don't think it's that relevant. I don't think it's a data point that is going to move the needle one way or another. I think, each new entrant to the market is news. When we saw corporate treasuries buying for the first time with MicroStrategy, that was news. Thereafter, not that interesting, right? When El Salvador came out and adopted Bitcoin, that was news the first time. Thereafter, not that interesting anymore. So each time, I think when the first insurance company came in and bought Bitcoin, that was news. When subsequent insurance companies come in, no one's going to care anymore. So I think, this idea that you're going to move around $1 trillion asset because of one data point or one piece of news, it's just not that practical.
Got it. All right. Well, Jeff, thanks for joining us today on All About Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That was Jeff Dorman, Chief Investment Officer at Arca. And that's it for All About Bitcoin. I'm Michael Casey. Join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in New York for the First Mover, your first look at the day's global crypto news headlines. You're watching CoinDesk TV. Bye for now.